Absorb mo lang, just let it simmer.
I just want to talk about the fact that I watch a lot of cooking shows on YouTube, and what drives me mental are the people who don't have rice cookers. Like, I understand, you don't find a rice cooker a priority, whatever, right? But there's this whole swath of people where they own bread mixers and they own like one-use appliances for every single dish. And for some reason, owning a rice cooker is like, oh, we don't need that. That's too much for just rice.
You sound pretty steamed up about it.
All right, man. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. You can't hear it, but I'm doing the raising my finger to say something, but I can't say anything because I got nothing.
Are we ready?
I'm ready. I was born ready.
Who the fuck says that in real life? Nobody. Nobody says that. Okay, welcome to the newest episode of 3 Point Landing. Today, I'm here with Matthew. This is Misha. We're going to be talking about Watchmen, the TV series. What did you think of the first episode, Matthew?
I really, really, really liked it. I mean, I don't know what people were expecting. I don't know what I was expecting, but on the whole, like everything I saw, I loved it.
Okay, so just a little groundwork for people who might not be familiar. Watchmen is based on the classic comic book series by Alan Moore and David Gibbons. It was a deconstruction of the superhero, the whole superhero myth, as it were, over 12 issues. It happened. It was set in the 80s, the mid to late 80s, and now the new show is set pretty much in real time. It's like 30 years after the comic book.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, first of all, I think what's really interesting is that everybody who, like, loves comics and popular culture, who is at least remotely familiar with Watchmen, they know that it's created by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, like you said, but in this show, Alan Moore is not credited.
Oh, well, Alan Moore doesn't want anything to do with anything.
And why is that?
The thing about Alan Moore, I mean, he's like one of my favorite crazy old men, as opposed to Frank Miller, who's just crazy at this point. Alan Moore has always made it clear that he never wanted to do a sequel to Watchmen. So he's pretty much disowned everything that ever came after, whether it was the comic prequels that DC did years later, or this sequel series that's happening now.
So he created it for DC, but shouldn't that mean he already has, like, shouldn't that mean that he has a stake in the creative future of Watchmen? Like, why can't he control Watchmen? Why can't he?
Well, that's not the way modern comic books work. I mean, unless you're like some superstar creator, you're not going to have the exclusive rights to your characters. And well, from what I understand, he had a handshake deal with DC that they would never do anything beyond the original series. Of course, time has shown that didn't last.
I think I heard about this. So the handshake deal is basically he made these characters, and the idea was that if DC did not do anything with the characters for a while, the rights would revert back to him, and Alan Moore would have like
nothing. No, I don't think there was anything like that. It's just that they promised, they owned the characters because he created them for the publisher, but they said they were never going to do anything with them.
Because I heard the scuttlebutt I heard is basically, if DC stops publishing Watchmen comics, he gets to have Watchmen back. But that's very easy to get around.
Because they own them. They don't need to do anything. They don't need to return them. They were never his to begin with. This isn't like leasing out characters to another studio like Marvel did with Fox and Sony. This is just DC wanting money.
I see.
Off of characters that they own. So as far as they're concerned, they don't own him a damn thing.
And they've done extensions to the Watchmen before, right? The Watchmen.
Yeah, they did prequel comic books. They've done side comic books that happened during the original series. They're doing something now called Doomsday Clock in the main DC continuity, which is matching up people like Dr. Manhattan with Superman. There's a lot of things happening now that Alan Moore does not approve of.
And Alan Moore is historically famous for like disapproving of everything that has been like built. Like, Alan Moore is the godfather of modern comics, some would say, and he's made like a bunch of stuff that have all been made into movies before, right? Like, and this isn't the first time he's been like, oh, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with this.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, every time that anybody's ever done an adaptation of his work, whether it was even the movie Watchmen by Zack Snyder or V for Vendetta by the Wachowski siblings,
and I think From Hell, and my personal favorite, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Personal favorite comic, and also personal favorite bad movie.
That was an awful, awful movie, can I just say? Great idea, but shitty movie. But yeah, pretty much. I mean, as far as he's concerned, when he makes a comic book, he says that's it. He says his piece. That's it. He disconnects from it. He doesn't want anybody to add anything to it. He doesn't want anybody trying to reinterpret it in a different way. But something that's interesting is that Gibbons, the artist on Watchmen, hasn't exactly felt the same way.
Yeah,
he's always been to some degree involved in the ancillary material, whether it's a sequel, a prequel, or whatever.
Like he gives this kind of sort of soft blessing on the whole affair.
Kind of, sorta. Whereas you can barely get Alan Moore to say 2 words about Watchmen now. Gibbons will always happily give you his 2 cents. He'll even endorse some of the projects that came after.
What I'm familiar with is like how in the first decade of this century, like you couldn't get Alan Moore to stop talking about how much he didn't like the work that was being done with this stuff. Mm-hmm. But what I kind of appreciate about him is that he always gives his blessing. Not that Dave Gibbons needs it, but he always gives his blessing to Dave Gibbons. Like, you know, if Dave wants to get involved in like those movies things or whatever, he's allowed to do it.
Yeah,
like,
I think he knows that he's speaking for himself. That's why. So he can't impose his will on other people.
Which is, I'd say, better than Stanley.
Okay, so let's talk about the first episode of the show. The Watchmen, the series, opens in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 with an incident that a lot of people may not be familiar with necessarily. Apparently, in 1921, a bunch of white people got upset, threw on their hoods, and decided to essentially burn down an entire black neighborhood.
And this is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I believe correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. I heard it was like this is Black Wall Street or something.
Yeah, it was apparently a neighborhood where the black people were doing very well with their businesses and all that stuff, and tensions flared over accusations of apparently a black teenager looked at a white girl the wrong way, and it was not appreciated.
Wow.
So, depending who you ask, between 50 and 300 people died that day. And the series makes no bones about it. They really show this to you. They show people dying in the streets. They show old-timey airplane strafing people from the sky. I mean, I didn't even know they could do that back then.
So off the bat, we're already starting this show with like a really serious, serious historical event, a racially charged moment, and one that is like profoundly political for like the whole milieu of America, right?
Hand to God, I thought it was a fictitious event. Apparently, it really happened. And then the series jumps forward 80, 90 years to the present day.
So 2019.
Mm-hmm. And where the police are now all hidden behind masks for their safety, apparently. They're not allowed to just draw their weapons. They need authorization from HQ before they can do anything. And one of these officers ends up in an altercation in a routine traffic stop, and the chief of police has to go down to the hospital to go check up on his guy after he gets shot up because he wasn't able to defend himself. And the chief of police is played by Miami Vice himself, Don Johnson.
That's my favorite part about like the series right now, as we are like, because we've only got one episode to go by, and I think we're gonna get a new one tonight, or tomorrow, and it's the world building. The world building is just so fascinating to me. I just love the fact that there's so many little details that make it very much familiar to us,
right?
But other details that are very different from how we experience the world. So the cops, like, they have their firearm underneath the steering wheel, and they cannot pull that gun out unless they get express command,
right. Like or there's permission, right?
Yeah, and there's a remote lock release or something like that. They have to call it in and say, "I need to use my gun," and then they'll give the permission and all that.
And
stuff.
I can actually see that happening today. I mean, with all the shooting the shooting incidents that have been going on lately.
You mean the misuse of police force, basically?
Absolutely, I can totally see that happening in the real world. Even up to the point of police officers having to keep their jobs a secret from everybody who they're not related to.
Yeah,
and not even being able to do their jobs without wearing masks in public. I mean, because let's face it, most people, they see a cop, they go the other way. I mean, they don't look to them as paragons of virtue anymore. They don't look at them as, they don't think to serve and protect when they see a cop. They just see somebody who might just potentially gun them down. And that doesn't matter whether or not you're here in the Philippines or if you're in the America that Watchmen represents. Something I think that's interesting, though, there's been a lot of debate online whether or not this show is too political. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know if there's such a thing as too political for a television show like Watchmen. I mean, the comic itself was, explicitly political, and not necessarily in the sense of, we've got a serious stance, although that was totally there.
Yeah.
But rather, so much of the story of Watchmen, all 12 issues, was bound up in politics. It was bound up in politics of the role of the state in in imminent Armageddon, the relationship that vigilantes have with authorities, everything, even down to the conclusion of the comic being about how Rorschach makes a stance about where he draws the line and how things should be resolved, and the manifesto he makes, everything, and even the role that the vigilantes have in peacekeeping. There's just one pivotal scene in the comic book, if I recall correctly, where Night Owl and Comedian are floating above the city, and the city is rioting and looting and everything, and they're like, all right, we gotta keep the masses in check and all that stuff. It's really, anybody who says that Watchmen, the comics, were not political is illiterate.
Absolutely. The entire, every single issue in that series, honestly. I mean, it was criticizing everything from, and I mean, at its core, it was a criticism of power politics. The conservatives who were running the show back in the day, whether we were talking about Reagan or Margaret Thatcher, those are the people that Alan Moore was pissed off at, the people he was scared of at the same time. So he wanted to show what happens if you took that to its extremes. But he basically cloaked it in a deconstruction of the superhero medium, which itself ties into that, because he was talking about nihilism. He was talking about the fascism that goes with putting on a mask and imposing your own order on the outside world.
The order that you choose, the order that you decide.
Right. And the thing about that is I cannot believe that anyone who read those books or even had any sort of understanding about them would not see that it was a completely the whole thing was a political commentary.
I guess where I come down on it is that, look, I'm willing to entertain or indulge a conversation about whether or not entertainment and popular culture should be political or not. I mean, I believe it should be political, but I can indulge that conversation saying, should there be politics in our games? But, the question of whether Watchmen is political or not is no bones about it.
Absolutely, without question. I mean,
you can have a stance about it, but you can't deny the facts.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you could argue that maybe something like Thanos' goals. I mean, you can have a pretty long conversation about the political motivations of somebody like Thanos and how that could be applied to our situation, or you may not. But with Watchmen, there's no going around it,
because there's so much political and cultural specificity to the original work. Like you said, it invoked Thatcher, it invoked Reagan, it invoked Nixon.
But something I read though, because Reagan was popular at the time, Alan Moore thought it would be safer if he just presented Richard Nixon in his fourth term rather than somebody who was presently sitting in office, because he figured that if it was too on the nose, that people would just reject it outright. So I think maybe that's what people are reacting to now with this new show. It's a little bit on the nose. I mean, it's more on the nose than the original series, for sure. But only because that the writer, Alex Kurtzman, doesn't seem to have any bones about showing us the here and now.
I don't mean to be correcting corrector. It's actually Damon Lindelof, I believe, who's the showrunner.
Seriously? Yeah. Okay. Whatever.
Who's the guy behind Leftovers, and
right.
He worked on Lost, I believe. I think you know more about these TV guys than I do, actually. But Damon Lindelof is the showrunner.
Okay, my bad. Because they work together. So
Kurtzman is currently working on Star Trek Discovery, and
he's the Star Trek shows.
Yeah, he's the Star Trek guy.
Oh wait, while we're on it, I mean, it's the same kind of people, I would think, who complain that the new Star Trek shows are too political. I mean, or they're too social justice warrior. I mean, those were. I mean,
you can have a stance over whether things are political or not, but the idea of politics being too much in Star Trek is weird because it's bound into the DNA of the property, and it's the same as with Watchmen.
The original series with Shatner. I mean, the reason that people still talk about it 50, 55 years later is because they had the balls to put a black woman, an Asian dude, a Russian guy with a bunch of white people and aliens, and they're all working together.
Yeah,
so
and
in the 60s, that's about as radical as you can get.
Yeah, I mean, the politics of the original Star Trek are very, in my humble opinion, they're very milquetoast, but also they're 50 years old.
They're 50 years old. I mean, some of those stories, I mean, you really got to take them with a grain of salt. I mean, you have to look at them as products of their time.
Yeah,
really, especially the way they approach their storytelling. But you also have to realize that back at the time, this was groundbreaking stuff. No one else was doing it.
I want to get back to that thing you mentioned about Nixon. That was new to me. Like I had no idea that the Nixon was really just sort of like a time traveling motion forward to serve as a stand-in for Reagan.
I think the exact quote from Alan Moore was he chose Nixon because nobody would have a problem with him being the bad guy.
That is true, and that's absolutely true. As early as 1985, with Nixon being behind them, like by just under a decade, if you say, "Oh, this is a bad president," like the whole comic book reading public would just be like, "Yep,
yeah, he was pretty bad, wasn't he?"
Yeah. It's the same way that we can only people can put Trump analogs in comics now while he's still president because he's inarguably like disliked.
I don't know. I think that guy's just digging his own hole.
Yeah, but I want to get back to the president thing. The reason why and the whole Nixon Reagan thing, because I'm very fascinated by this series. The current president is Robert Redford,
which I think is awesome.
Yeah, they call him the Sundance president even at one point. And they say, and in fact, there's this. Oh, I'll get back to that later. And they cast Robert Redford to play Robert Redford. By the way, sorry,
I don't think they cast him. I mean, they used his picture. Is he actually in the show?
I think he's officially been cast.
You're serious? Okay, I'm going to watch this all the way through.
I did not notice his picture, so maybe you're 100% right.
His picture's there in the classroom.
So they secured his likeness at the very least. But I heard that if it's necessary, they can get him in to play the president, because he'd be the right age, because it's 2019, and that's exactly how old Robert Redford would be.
Right.
And what was interesting to me also is they talk about how racial tensions really like changed the landscape of the Watchmen universe. Right. Moving on from 1985 onwards. And so they make this remark about reparations made to black people under the presidency of Redford. And they call them Redfordations. Right. Which is considered a slur, or at least a kind of a racist, like if you say it, you betray your racist beliefs by saying it, which is evocative of the word Obamacare, where you like take something and you derisively attach something.
I was thinking more of something like affirmative action. That's the way it hit me, that they were slinging, again, what you said, something that's ostensibly positive, but giving it a negative connotation because the minorities are the ones who benefit from this. That was mentioned in that scene where it was Regina King's character.
Yeah, Regina
right?
King.
She's a school teacher, and she was born in Vietnam. Vietnam has been a state of the United States ever since Dr. Manhattan helped them win the Vietnam War in the 60s.
It's the 52nd or 51st state of America, basically, right?
I never could count. But so Dr. Manhattan helped them win the war. And it's been a state ever since. So she grew up, and now she's a teacher. She was also a former police officer from the time before cops were allowed to wear masks. And she goes into this story about how she was once the victim of a gunshot. She was attacked, and a
gunshot wound.
That's what made her decide to retire, because this was before cops were allowed to be anonymous.
That's her official reason. She says that I'm not a cop because I got injured in the line of duty, basically, and I didn't want to like put that on my children or live a life knowing that I could die any moment, that kind of stuff. All reasonable stuff. Yeah. But I'm smirking at you right now because you and I both know that that's kind of disingenuous, because she's actually operating as a
she's a superhero.
Yeah,
she's a superhero. She's like she's basically a latex covered nun.
What's her name again? Sister Night?
Black Sister? Night Sister.
Night Sister.
Is that right?
Oh man! Oh god! Are we...
I'm pretty sure it was Night Sister. She's got the whole thing. She's got the habit. She's got the rosary beads.
Sister Midnight? No, that's of David Bowie's song.
Yes, it is. But yeah, I thought she was very well cast in the role, though. I mean, I totally believe her as a homemaker, teacher by day, and bakery owner. She's not a teacher.
She's a bakery owner.
She was a guest in the classroom.
Look at us discover the episode in our brains.
Right. We should have watched it again. But okay. She's opening a Vietnamese bakery in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
This black lady, as they do, opening Vietnamese bake shops, and she is a homemaker, and she is also a superhero. There we go.
Yeah.
And she works with Don Johnson's police chief to try and figure out who shot up that cop from the beginning.
Did you catch that very subtle, smiley face she made with the eggs?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So she cracked some eggs, and we get a shot from underneath the bowl, and the egg yolks form a smiley face. It's meant to evoke the smiley face from the iconic smiley face from the Watchmen comics.
Yep. And something that happens a little bit after that is we see some of the aftermath of what's his name, the bad guy.
Ozymandias.
Right. We see a little bit of the backlash from his evil plot from the end of the original Watchmen book, which was he kidnapped a bunch of artists, writers, scientists, geneticists, physicists, you name it. He kidnapped them. He had them all create an evil alien menace, completely artificially, so that he could inflict it on New York, and this would unite the world in a common direction, fighting against an unseen alien foe, not knowing that he'd engineered the whole thing to create world peace. And the form that alien invader took was a giant psychic squid.
Not the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man?
No, I'm sorry. That was another movie. But so a giant psychic squid killed a whole bunch of New Yorkers, and the psychic feedback apparently injured a whole lot more. And now, 30 years later, we still get little baby squids falling from the sky.
That's right.
Apparently it's an everyday thing.
Yeah, they've got sirens and alarms, sort of like a storm warning,
right?
Except it's squid warnings.
And then they just roll their eyes like, oh God, not this again.
I'm going to be late for work.
Stupid squid.
Yeah. That squid stuff, that's removed from the Zack Snyder Watchmen movie, right?
What do you mean? Oh, yeah. He changed the ending. He didn't want to go with a space squid. What did he go with?
I don't know because I've never seen the movie, actually.
I'm trying to remember what he went with. I know this because I'm like one of the 8 people who actually likes that movie. Most people I know cannot stand it. I mean, a lot of people say... I
watched the first half. I thought it was fine. I may not have finished it, but it was not to any degree offensive to me. Or
I think what he did was he framed Dr. Manhattan. It was still a similar, like an explosion and a psychic attack, but I think he framed Dr. Manhattan.
That makes Hollywood movie sense to me, actually. So I'm, everybody can email us or message us on Facebook
and tell us how wrong we are,
how we don't remember what happened in a 10-year-old movie, and we're just making up endings. But yep, that's the ending I'm going to go with.
No, but seriously, I fucking like that movie. Okay, I do not like anything that Zack Snyder did with the DC Extended Universe, but I love Watchmen. I love his Watchmen.
My personal feeling from the 1 hour and 10 minutes I saw of the movie, why I didn't go for all 2 hours, I don't know why. But
you could make it 3 hours if you watch the animated bits.
That's right, with the Tales from the Black Trader stuff. No, it's slavishly faithful.
Absolutely.
And that can be held against it. I choose not to hold it against
it. I don't, because I've seen worse. Okay.
Yeah.
It is absolutely slavish to the source material, but I don't think it's held back by it. I actually like the way they interpret those panels, in the same way that I like the way that Snyder created 300, which also was pretty much shot for shot the original comics.
I think the problem really is that, what happened, this happens a lot in the film discourse or whatever you call it, is that things that a director becomes famous for doing bad things, or at least he acquires a sort of like a negative reputation for some of his worst attributes. And then those attributes get retroactively moved back to paint his previous work in a bad light. And so in the case of Zack Snyder, let's be honest, Batman v Superman is a hot pile of garbage, but I do not think that necessarily means that just because he made some of the worst superhero movies, that automatically every work he's made before is automatically bad.
No, absolutely not. I still stand by my love of those movies.
Yeah,
honestly.
300's not the worst thing in the world.
I enjoyed 300. So did a lot of people.
Do I agree with its machismo and its weird reinterpretation of colored people as like, an exotic, effeminate other. Yeah, but that doesn't make it a bad movie.
Fair enough. For me, what I really enjoyed about the Watchmen movie was, for decades, literally, people had always maintained that there's no way this movie's going to get made. There's no way this can be translated to the screen. And Zack Snyder, whatever, for better or worse, he cracked the code. He found a way to bring those ridiculous costumes to the big screen in a way that wasn't insulting. He found a way to recreate iconic panels and
absolutely,
and somehow make them convincing. And he also found a way to bring all 12 issues and most of their themes intact to the big screen in under 3 hours somehow.
Yeah. I think he did a lot more than most people give him credit for. And honestly, the thing, I think I've talked about this with you before when we've been talking about various superhero movies and stuff like that, is that the problem I think with Watchmen was that it's a movie that came out before superhero culture had really disseminated itself to the mainstream. Like every American grew up with comic books for sure, but comic books and superheroes did not penetrate like the entire consciousness of people.
Right,
and so it might have been a little too soon to be all like, all right, here's Night Owl, here's Dr. Manhattan, here's Silk Spectre, and they're all like pissed off superheroes.
Because superhero movies weren't that big a thing yet.
Yeah, I mean, sure, it was 9 years or 6 years in from Spider-Man, but just Spider-Man, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies and Tim Burton's Batman movies do not constitute an entire genre or an entire literary genre.
Not at all.
Yeah.
In fact, you can even argue that Spider-Man's prominence was spurred on by, of all things, Blade in 1998. Because back then Marvel Comics was bankrupt. They weren't doing anything with their characters on the big screen, so they needed the money. They basically sold off most of their major properties to different studios, and so this new line tested the waters with Blade, saw some money in that. Then they went off with Ghost Rider and whatnot. Fox went with Daredevil and your favorite, the Fantastic Four.
My favorite, the Fantastic Four.
And Sony, as we all know, went with Spider-Man, and they chose Sam Raimi to direct it, who heavily rooted it in the era he grew up in, which was the Silver Age comics, the classic Peter Parker as starving student, madly in love with girl next door, Mary Jane Watson. And those films exist in a very specific time and place when people weren't entirely sure if this superhero thing was going to be a real trend, if it was going to have legs. But again, here we are, almost 16, 17 years later, and we are still talking about these movies. But I agree with you. The Watchmen movie coming out when it did may have been a little premature as far as the general populace was concerned, because people weren't as aware of the superhero tropes as they are now after 10 years of the MCU. But if I told you 10 years ago that people would be weeping in theaters across the world over Tony Stark's death while finagling the Infinity Gauntlet off of Thanos, spoiler warning, sorry guys, you wouldn't have believed me either. That we would get to this point in pop culture. But that's why we can have, this is the perfect time for a show like Watchmen to come out. That's why this is the perfect time for a show like The Boys to come out.
Yeah, which we talked about before, is that, both The Boys and Watchmen are like different television shows that are now building in a collective literacy of comic books and superheroes that is now shared by an entire movie or TV going public, not just a subset of pop culture fans, aka comic book geeks.
Right. And something that was interesting, I think, about the Watchmen, the original comic book, and reflected to a point in the film, but maybe not enough for some people, was that these people they're all sad sacks in their regular lives. They're not fully alive, or they don't feel like themselves. They don't feel empowered until they put on their kinky outfits and they go beat up some bad guys. And that's something that you see in the relationship between Night Owl and Silk Spectre in the original. They literally can't get it on until after they've taken out some bad guys.
Yeah.
And they did that. Also happened in the movie that was also presented. But an argument that I've seen against the film is that it's too slick. in that it doesn't make them look pathetic enough. In fact, it glamorizes them. Some people say that the film misses the point. It doesn't present superheroes as sad, fractured, broken people. It presents them as people that you want to emulate because they're so gosh darn cool.
I get what this person is saying. Okay, like, so this is where we go into the realm of like all film criticism and all literary criticism is subject to a personal interpretation or personal opinion. And I think it's absolutely fair to claim a view that the movie glamorizes it. But I also think that because everybody looks so slick in those movies, it's supposed to represent like an internal idealization.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, they are pathetic, and the contrast and irony is that they don't look pathetic because this is the fantasy that they've been working out in their heads.
I guess so. But as we the audience, are we supposed to be in on that delusion, or we're supposed to we're not supposed to be deluded. We're supposed to be the outside looking in.
That's fair.
Right? We're not supposed to be on the ground with them. We're supposed to know more than them. So we're not supposed to be in on their delusion. But while we're on it, speaking of delusion, part of the premise of the new show is that what happened 30 years ago with Ozymandias, his giant space squid, pretend space squid, uniting America and Russia against a common foe. Apparently, that didn't last. Whatever peace they had has since been shattered because somehow the world at large found out that it was all a setup, that Adrian Veidt had actually engineered the entire thing. And in the show, he's shown to be alive and well. He's played by Jeremy Irons.
Great guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's Scar. He's like the best Scar.
And he's also in that. He's also the best thing about the Dungeons and Dragons movie.
I don't want to talk about that movie. That movie's so bad. But he's generally the best thing in most of the movies.
He's always the best thing in it. Like he is immune to the slings and arrows of terrible cinema. He shall walk into a bad movie and exit it completely untainted.
Like Die Hard 3 should not be anywhere near as fun as it is, except for him. I honestly
100% agree. You know, it's funny. I think for every good movie that you mentioned in this podcast, I feel like I might be legally obligated to mention a terrible movie.
You already mentioned Dungeons and Dragons.
Exactly. I'm just providing you the framework that you can now expect at least one Dungeons and Dragons every episode.
Christ almighty. Okay. I hope you can hear me out there. I'm rolling my eyes as hard as I possibly can at Matthew right now.
The microphone won't pick up the flapping noises.
I can try. Anyways, correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression from the show was that Rorschach's journal got published, and that's how the entire world found out.
Yeah.
Okay, I got a couple of issues with that. Rorschach knew he was going off to his possible death, right?
Yeah, and he mailed it to the New Frontiersman.
He mailed his journal, his handwritten journal,
to a kook publication, basically.
Right. Okay, never mind the fact that most mainstream media outlets wouldn't even notice the crackpot writings of a tabloid like that. Mm-hmm. No matter how based in truth, no matter, if they were getting the actual scoop from the real person, as it were. Mainstream media might not necessarily pick up on that, but so fine. Let's assume that they did, that CNN and Fox News and all the other news outlets, that they all picked up on this crazy story from this crazy little right-wing tabloid, right?
I'll counter-offer something, which is, I think you're right. Mainstream media would not dignify the journal ravings of a madman, especially one, who's known for like the actions and his mental instability.
A masked vigilante at that.
But we also live in an environment today wherein just about anybody will pick up any random kook-ass, there are all these disinformation websites that exist now that you and I would not dignify with even a click. But we always have that crazy uncle or crazy aunt who's just like shares it with you. Right. So I think it's very possible
if it's on the internet, it must be true.
Well, it's more like even if mainstream media doesn't come in to support to lift Rorschach's writings into the public, into the mainstream, it will find its way to the kooks who are attracted to that kind of material.
Okay, fine.
Presuming a digital network, or at least presuming an ability to distribute that kind of information.
Assuming the internet exists in this universe.
I think the internet does exist, but we haven't seen it. So, probably there is none. I mean, they have pagers for crying out loud. So
they have Pagers.
Yeah, pagers.
That's right. That's right. No, okay, fine. Given all that, fine. Let's say that, the world took notice of Rorschach's crazy writing.
And not the world, but specifically a disenfranchised, angry, crazy, kook bunch of people.
To the point that Ozymandias had to go into hiding. To the point that he has to be declared legally dead because he's been missing for so long. But what I have to ask is, it goes a little bit to the original text. And this is where it gets extremely nerdy.
All right, go. I go.
He didn't know about the space squid when he mailed that thing.
Then in that case,
what did he put in his journal that that put the whole world against Ozymandias before Rorschach? I mean, Rorschach died, so there's no way he could have amended that thing.
I think you're talking about two very different things. I think the train of logic you're going for is one that I agree with, but they're not on the same path. So Rorschach's writings have nothing to do with the squid.
So what did he expose? Just the death of the comedian.
The death of the comedian, the corruption that is lying at the heart of the relationship between government and vigilantes. Who knows? Or at least it's the kind of material that galvanizes people to believe in anti-authority, and all that stuff. And however the squid got exposed would have happened through separate means, not through Rorschach's journal, but through something else. After all, it's been 40 years. Even if the squid wasn't exposed. Even if the squid wasn't the squid conspiracy was not exposed on year one of the whole thing. There's 39 years left to go for the truth to come out through some other means. Who knows?
Why do you keep adding years? It's been 30 years.
I was actually gonna lampshade that, but you beat me to it. 21 years.
I never could
84.
Count. That's
69.
Bad. That's such bad math.
17.
8. Anyways, so yeah, I mean, I really want to know what exactly set the world against Adrian Veidt. I really want to know, and I'm hoping the next few episodes will take us in that direction.
I mean, anybody who's been listening this long knows that we've just gone deep into weeds, into nerd territory here.
That was embarrassing.
No, I think it's great. I just, I also want to encourage people to check out the series. If they're even remotely interested, even if they've never read the comic, because I think what's interesting about the show is that it doesn't presume knowledge of the comic. That's hard for us. That's hard for us to grasp because we've read the comics. But if you sort of check it out, you won't know who this. You'll see a man named Adrian Veidt in his castle.
Yeah, being serviced by what I assume are robots.
Yeah, by robots. You'll see, Dr. Manhattan isn't explicitly referenced.
He's on the news. He's on TV at some point.
Yeah, but they're not part of the main. You know what I mean? All of these things that are so important to the Watchmen comic,
right.
are not in the main line of the narrative.
But something that's coming up, that's something that they hinted at, and I think they're going to flesh it out in further episodes, is there is going to be a documentary series within the show.
Oh shit!
That talks about the old super team that included the main characters from the original Watchmen, and I think that's interesting because in a kind of meta way, like what the boys did with their reality shows.
Yeah,
and this one seems to be made up of documentary footage and I guess historical reenactments.
And I love that bit too, because they call it I always love it when television shows sort of reflect or speak to our current reality.
Yeah, American hero story.
Yeah, because it's actually supposed to be a riff on American Horror Story. Not just the name check, but they even asked Ryan Murphy of American Horror Story.
If he was okay?
Yeah, if it was okay, and if he might be interested in directing or appearing in it. He said he said he won't appear in the show, but he gave his blessing for the name American.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah. But they wanted to they were toying around with this concept of, in this universe, Ryan Murphy directs, superhero anthology shows. And I'm like, whoa.
Okay.
That's kind of cool.
That kind of is. And to be perfectly honest, I think it's a great time for fans of the comic book genre in general for two reasons. One, it's great that the world has finally caught up to something that we've always known, in that that there is emotional depth, there is narrative depth, there is a lot of stuff to be had from reading these stories.
Political depth,
political depth, absolutely. So there's a lot that can be gained from. It's not just for kids, and that's something that I've been, I'm practically a broken record at this point as far as that sort of thing goes, in declaring that these things should be taken seriously. I mean, a lot of it is for kids, granted, but not all of it is. That's number one. It's great that
it's like
we're
what they
at
say.
that point in the pop culture zeitgeist. Sorry, that we're at that point in people's pop culture consciousness that they can understand. Oh, that's a reference to this, or this is a reference to that. We've come that far. I love that. And number two, another reason that I like that, the part of the reason that we've gotten this far is because we've had so many of the traditional kind of superhero stories that now it's the perfect time also to be telling alternative sorts of superhero stories, deconstructions. But they couldn't do these kinds of deconstructions before people actually knew what they were deconstructing.
Yeah, and the real world and the critical zeitgeist reflects this already. Just the fact that you can open your web browser or your news feed and see like an article that says, "Oh, we're tired of superheroes, superhero glut."
Yep.
Oh, there's been superhero fatigue. Is
absolutely
like that to me is the clarion call for these kinds of shows. You know what I mean? Like if I was an executive, which I'll never be, but if I was an executive in a network and I see there, we're tired of this genre, I'd be like, time to order some deconstructions.
No, but that's the thing. I mean, the fact that it's a genre now, whereas when I was in grade school, it was something that, just, you and your nerdy friends who were into this sort of thing. And that's something the mainstream would never get into. I once actually dated somebody who's like, I don't read comics. I only read Sandman. I would never read comics. See, what do you say to that?
Sandman's a comic.
The Justice League's in the first issue. I mean, seriously, the Justice League is in the first issue of Sandman. So how is that not a comic book? But yeah, I mean, think about it. More than 10 years ago, like 12, 13 years ago, Mystery Men came out and nobody knew what the hell to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Mystery Men is ahead of its time.
I'm going to stand by that. Mystery Men is awesome.
I think that's giving it too much credit, but it's definitely ahead of its time. Does that make sense?
It mocked a lot of the superhero tropes that people take for granted now. And back then, it was only funny to a very select group. I think it was definitely ahead of its time.
Wow, I feel like there's just so much more to talk about. Actually, I think we could. I think.
Okay. So earlier I Googled while you were talking. I'm sorry. I promise I was kind of listening.
No, it's okay.
No, I Googled. I was right. What Ozymandias did in the movie was he didn't present a giant space squid as a threat from beyond the stars to unite the people of the Earth. He presented Dr. Manhattan as the threat in our midst that the people of the Earth have to unite.
That kind of makes sense, especially since so much of the film is hinged around Billy Crudup's very excellent performance.
Yes,
it's a shame to not bring him forward into the main plot.
And that's something that I never understood. There were people who absolutely fucking hated that idea that they didn't use the canonical ending of the comic book. So I'm like, so you're saying it sticks too much to the book, but the tiny little bit that doesn't, that's what you're upset about? Like 98% of this movie is straight from the pages. I'm not even exaggerating.
Yeah, no, I mean...
And then that's what you complain about? It actually makes sense, like you said, in the context of the film, because we follow this guy through his transformation, through his disconnect from humanity, through the destruction of his marriage.
Because the movie is so much physically shorter than the actual comic book.
Right.
Billy Crudup's Dr. Manhattan sort of takes up more space in the film. And I think from a shape sense, it becomes more important for him to have an into the third act.
Right. As opposed to him just trying to distance himself from humanity like what he did in the comic book. Which brings us to the TV show. What do you think Dr. Manhattan's been up to the last 30 years?
Well, we see him don't we see a shot of him on the moon or on Mars?
I would think it was Mars. It was kind of pink.
Yeah, it was pink, so it was Mars.
Fine.
It was Mars.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think he's been up to? Just building ice castles like Elsa?
Oh man, I'm the worst at speculation. I don't like my brain does not instinctively go to speculation. I tend to be more of a guy who goes like, all right, tell me, show me, creator. What is it you have?
Nope. You can't do that. You cannot answer a question with a question.
All right. So, you know what I think? I think he is keeping tabs on Ozymandias. He's waiting for Ozymandias to resurface.
He's waiting for Scar to make a move.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where I'm going to go with that.
That makes sense.
I don't think that necessarily means it's going to translate into action, because after all, Dr. Manhattan really doesn't want to have anything to do with the affairs of, mortal men anymore. Right. But, the supposed greatest intellect of the earth can only be outmatched by the most powerful being that's ever been. So I think if I was an emotionally disaffected, omnipotent super being, I definitely be like, well, I'll stick around and see what this guy's up to because I'm the only one who can stop him.
That's fair. For my part, I like to think that he's doing what some helpful people on YouTube have conjured up. He's making ice castles on Mars to the tune of "Let It Go," and it's amazing.
Have you seen that video where they set the scenes from Watchmen 2009 to "Let It Go"?
Yeah, pretty much. That's what I meant.
You should check it out.
Yes. Okay, so that was our episode on Watchmen. Let us know what you all think we can expect in the upcoming episodes. By the time this comes out, there should be a couple more out to talk about. And
are we going to revisit this? Because I had so much fun today. Like, I would love to revisit this Watchmen. Like, sort of like not do a weekly recap, but sort of like check in and talk about what's going on with the show.
Well, let's let the listeners decide. Why don't you all tell us if you want to hear more of us talking about Watchmen? Follow us on Facebook. This is 3 Point Landing. I'm Misha.
I'm Matthew.
Blink once for yes. Fuck you.
What was that?
I don't know.